Pick it up. The man's voice slid across the diner like cold grease. Grace Carter stood beside booth 7 with a coffee pot in one hand and an old white towel in the other. At her feet, a handful of coins lay scattered in a puddle of coffee one of the men had knocked from the table on purpose. 3 men laughed. The 4th man did not. He sat at the end of the booth in a dark wool coat, his silver hair combed neatly back, his eyes as still as winter glass. Everyone in East Detroit knew Vincent Moretti, even if they pretended they did not. He owned 2 clubs, half a block of buildings, and enough favors in the city to make good people lower their voices when his name came up. Grace knew better than to stare. She looked down at the coins. Nickels, dimes, quarters, not even enough for a bus ride home. Go on," said the younger man with the gold watch. "You want your tip, don't you?" Grace tightened her fingers around the towel. She was 38 years old, with tired feet, a sore back, and a son sleeping at Mrs. Bell's apartment 2 floors above a closed beauty shop. Rent was due Friday. Malik's medicine had run out that morning, and the manager, Mr. Doyle, had already warned her twice that customers at night were not to be argued with. So Grace bent down, not because she was weak, because hunger had a way of teaching proud people how to kneel without letting their souls touch the floor. The diner was nearly empty, except for an old couple by the window and a truck driver at the counter pretending not to see. Rain tapped against the glass in thin silver lines. The neon sign outside flickered over the wet street. Rosewood Diner. Open all night. Grace picked up 1 coin, then another. Her blue waitress dress, faded from years of washing, brushed the coffee on the floor. A dark stain spread near the hem. She could hear the men laughing above her, low and careless, as if her dignity were part of the evening's entertainment. Only Vincent remained silent. When Grace stood again, she placed the wet coins on the edge of the table. "Anything else I can get you, gentlemen?" she asked softly. The man with the gold watch smirked. A smile would be nice. Grace gave him one. Small, polite, empty enough to survive. Then she turned toward the counter. Behind her, one of the men said, "People forget their place these days." Grace kept walking. She had heard worse, not always in words. Sometimes it came in the way customers snapped their fingers. Sometimes in the way a landlord looked at her paycheck and sighed. Sometimes in the way doctors spoke slowly, as if a mother with tired shoes could not understand the price of keeping a child alive. At the counter, Mr. Doyle leaned close. "You handled that well," he whispered. Grace did not answer. Handling things well had become the story of her life. She handled double shifts. She handled unpaid bills. She handled Malik's hospital forms, his tired eyes, his quiet way of pretending not to be afraid when his chest hurt. She poured fresh coffee into a clean pot and looked at the clock above the pie case. 10:42 p.m. Malik would be asleep by now, curled under the old quilt her mother had sewn before her hands became too stiff. He was 12, but small for his age. But with thoughtful brown eyes and a habit of thanking people for things no one else noticed. Earlier that evening, before Grace left for work, he had stood in the kitchen doorway holding his worn backpack. "Mama," he had said. "Mrs. Bell said the hospital called again." Grace had paused with one shoe on. What did they want? They said my rare blood profile is still in their emergency registry. He had tried to sound casual, like boys do when they want to protect their mothers. They said if there's ever an emergency, they might call to check family matches. Grace had crossed the room and touched his cheek. "You don't have to do anything that scares you." Malik had smiled, that gentle smile that always made Grace feel both proud and afraid. What if somebody needs us? Those words stayed with her now as she wiped the counter under the dim lights of the diner. What if somebody needs us? Grace looked back at booth 7. Vincent Moretti was watching her. Not with kindness, not with shame. Just watching, as if she were a small detail in a world he already owned. His phone sat face down beside his coffee cup. A minute later, it began to buzz. Once, twice, 3 times. Vincent ignored it at first. Then he turned it over, glanced at the screen, and the color left his face. The laughter at the booth faded. He stood so quickly the coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "What is it, boss?" the man with the gold watch asked. Vincent did not answer him. He pressed the phone to his ear, and for the first time that night, Grace heard fear in his voice. Tell me my son is breathing." Vincent Moretti's face changed before anyone spoke another word. The hard lines around his mouth, the calm cruelty in his eyes, the quiet pride of a man used to being obeyed, all of it cracked under the weight of one sentence coming through that phone. Grace Carter stood behind the counter with the coffee pot still in her hand. She had seen many kinds of fear in her life. Fear in a mother counting bills at midnight. Fear in a boy waiting for a doctor to say whether the pain in his chest was serious. Fear in elderly customers who sat too long over one cup of coffee because home had become too quiet. But the fear on Vincent Moretti's face was different. It was naked. It was helpless. And it did not know what to do with itself. "Say that again," Vincent said into the phone. Yet the men at booth 7 stopped smiling. Even the rain outside seemed to soften. Vincent turned his back slightly, but Grace could still hear piece of the call. "Luca, emergency room. Blood pressure dropped. Rare match." His hand gripped the edge of the table. The knuckles went pale. Grace looked away. A mother knew when another parent was being broken open, and even after what had happened moments earlier, she could not bring herself to stare at someone's worst minute. Mr. Doyle came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Everything all right?" he asked, though everyone knew it was not. Vincent ended the call without saying goodbye. For a moment, he stood perfectly still. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out several bills, and dropped them on the table without counting. "We're leaving," he said. The man with the gold watch slid out of the booth. "Boss, what happened?" "My son is at St. Catherine's." The words were quiet, but they emptied the diner of all its noise. Grace's hand tightened around the coffee pot. St. Catherine's. That was Malik's hospital. The place with pale green walls, vending machines that never worked, and nurses who knew Grace by name because she had spent so many nights there, sitting beside her son's bed. Vincent moved toward the door. His men followed quickly, no longer laughing, no longer proud. The gold watchman passed Grace without looking at her. Only Vincent paused. Not for an apology, not even for a word. His eyes met Grace's for half a second, and then he walked out into the rain. The black car waiting outside pulled away so fast its tires hissed against the street. Back from the diner breathed again. The old couple by the window looked down at their plates. The truck driver cleared his throat. Mr. Doyle walked to booth 7, saw the money on the table, and nodded as if cash could clean everything it touched. Grace placed the coffee pot back on the warmer. Her hands were steady, but her heart was not. St. Catherine's. She glanced at the clock. 10:58 p.m. Malik was supposed to be asleep. Then the phone behind the counter rang. Mr. Doyle reached for it first. "Rosewood Diner." He listened, then looked at Grace. The look alone made her stomach drop. "It's for you." Grace stepped closer. "For me?" He held out the receiver. Grace wiped her palm on her apron before taking it. "Hello, Mrs. Carter," a woman asked. Grace knew that voice. Nurse Helen from the pediatric wing. Kind, tired. Made always gentle when the news was bad. Yes, this is Grace. I'm sorry to call you at work. Malik is safe. He's not hurt. Grace closed her eyes for one breath. Then why are you calling? There's an emergency case here tonight. A child, 11 years old. The doctors are searching for a rare blood match, and Malik's medical profile is one of the closest records in our system. Grace leaned against the counter. Her whole life had taught her to be careful when people in clean offices used the word emergency. Poor mothers were often asked to give more than they could afford. Are you asking my son to donate blood? Grace asked. No, Nurse Helen said quickly. Because of Malik's medical history, that is not what we are asking. His record simply helped the lab identify a rare marker that may run in your family. We need your permission to test whether you might be compatible. Grace looked toward the rain-dark window. Outside, the streetlights trembled in puddles. For a strange moment, she saw Vincent's face again, drained of power, stripped down to nothing but a father's terror. How serious is the child? Grace asked. Nurse Helen was quiet for a second. Very. Grace heard herself breathing. Behind her, Mr. Doyle whispered, Grace? She lifted one hand at Gunn, asking him not to speak. Does Malik know? She asked. He's awake. Mrs. Bell brought him in after we called the apartment. He said he wanted us to ask you. Grace's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. Of course he did. Her boy, with his thin shoulders and old soul. Her boy, who once gave his lunch to a classmate and told Grace he simply was not hungry. Her boy, who had learned too early that pain did not make a person less useful to the world. What did he say? Grace whispered. Nurse Helen's voice softened. He said, if that boy's mama is scared, we should help. Grace covered her mouth. For the first time that night, the humiliation at Booth 7 became small, beside something larger. Not forgotten, not forgiven. Just smaller, because Malik was offering what those men had never understood. Not power, not money. Mercy. Grace looked toward the door, where Vincent Moretti had disappeared. Then she straightened. I'm coming, she said. Please tell my son I'm coming. Grace Carter did not remember taking off her apron. She only remembered Mr. Doyle saying, Go, in a voice softer than she had ever heard from him. She remembered the old couple by the window, watching her with sad, quiet eyes. She remembered the rain hitting her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She remembered running past the flickering neon sign of the Rosewood Diner, clutching her coat closed with one hand and her purse with the other. By the time she reached St. Catherine's Hospital, her shoes were soaked through. The emergency entrance glowed under white lights. Ambulances sat outside like sleeping animals. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and fear. Grace had known that smell for years. She hurried to the front desk. I'm Grace Carter. My son Malik is here. The nurse looked up, recognized her, and immediately stood. He's on the pediatric floor with Nurse Helen. He's all right. Grace nodded, but her heart did not slow. A mother could hear the words all right, and still feel the world shaking beneath her feet. And she took the elevator to the 3rd floor. When the doors opened, she saw Mère Belle first, wrapped in her brown winter coat, sitting with both hands folded over her purse. Beside her stood Nurse Helen, a silver-haired woman with gentle eyes and a clipboard pressed to her chest. And there was Malik. Her boy sat in a chair near the nurse's station, wearing his gray hoodie and old sneakers, his legs not quite reaching the floor. He looked smaller under the hospital lights, younger. But when he saw Grace, he stood quickly. Mama. Grace crossed the hall and pulled him into her arms. For a moment, she did not speak. She only held him, feeling the sharp bones of his shoulders beneath the hoodie, feeling his warm breath against her coat. "Baby," she whispered. "You scared me." "I'm okay," Malik said. I told them not to make you worry." Grace pulled back and touched his face. "That is not your job." His eyes lowered. Nurse Helen stepped closer. "Mrs. Carter, before anything happens, Dr. Ellis will explain everything clearly. Malik is not being asked to do anything unsafe. Because of his medical history, his rare blood profile is already in the registry. Tonight, what helped us first was his record. It gave the lab a direction. Now we need to confirm a family match and see whether you may be compatible as well." Grace blinked. "Me?" "Yes," Nurse Helen said. "Rare blood markers often run in families. Malik's record may have already saved us ours." Grace looked at her son. Malik gave a small shrug, as if saving ours in an emergency were nothing. "They said there's a boy," he murmured. "He's 11. Grace swallowed. Down the hall, behind a pair of glass doors, she saw a group of men in dark coats standing stiffly near a private waiting area. One of them wore a gold watch. Her stomach tightened. Then Vincent Moretti stepped into view. He was no longer the man from booth 7. At the diner, he had seemed carved from stone. Here, beneath the hospital lights, he looked older. His coat was open. His tie hung loose. His silver hair had fallen out of place. He was speaking to a doctor, but his eyes kept moving toward the closed room behind him. Grace knew that look. She had worn it herself. It was the look of a parent trying to bargain silently with heaven. Vincent turned. For one long second, he saw Grace. Recognition crossed his face slowly, like a shadow passing over a wall. The waitress. The woman from the diner. The woman who had knelt on the floor while his men laughed. Grace lifted her chin, not in pride, but in the simple refusal to disappear. Vincent took one step toward her, then stopped when Nurse Helen guided Grace and Malik into a small consultation room. Dr. Ellis was waiting there, a tired black man with kind eyes and a calm voice. He explained the situation carefully. Luca Moretti had a rare blood complication after a sudden internal bleed. The hospital had units coming from another city, but the delay was dangerous. Malik's rare blood profile had pointed them toward a possible family match in Grace. If Grace matched, a carefully screened donation from her could help stabilize Luca until the other blood arrived. Grace listened without moving. Malik reached for her hand under the table. "You don't have to, Mama," he whispered. Grace looked at him. This child, who had so little, still wanted to protect her from giving more. She squeezed his fingers. Then she thought of Vincent at the diner, silent while cruelty sat beside him. She thought of the coins in the coffee. She thought of the word place, spoken as if some human beings were born lower than others. And still, beyond all that, there was an 11-year-old boy. On the other side of the wall, a child who had done nothing wrong. Grace turned back to Dr. Ellis. "If I'm a match," she said quietly, "you do what you need to do." Malik leaned against her shoulder. Outside the consultation room, Vincent Moretti stood perfectly still, staring through the glass. And for the first time in many years, the powerful man had nowhere at all. Grace Carter had given many things in her life. She had given sleep to double shifts. She had given new shoes to Malik while wearing old ones herself. She had given polite answers to rude people, warm plates to lonely truck drivers, and patience to a world that rarely returned it. But sitting in that small hospital room, with a nurse tying a blue band around her arm, she understood something different. This was not giving from weakness. This was giving because her son was watching. Malik sat beside Mrs. Bell near the doorway, holding his backpack against his chest. His brown eyes stayed on Grace, wide and worried, though he tried to look brave. Dr. Ellis checked the chart one more time. "You're doing well, Mrs. Carter," he said. "Your screening looks good. We'll move carefully." Grace nodded. "I'm fine." She was not entirely fine. She was tired, hungry, wet from the rain, and then still carrying the sound of coins dropping into spilled coffee. But none of that mattered when a child was fighting for breath down the hall. Nurse Helen smiled gently. "Just keep looking at Malik." Grace did. Her boy lifted one hand in a small wave. Grace smiled back. Outside the room, Vincent Moretti stood near the wall, with his hands clasped behind his back. His men were gathered a few steps away, quieter now than they had been in the diner. The man with the gold watch kept looking toward the floor. Vincent had asked 3 times whether there was anything money could do. Each time, the doctor had answered the same way. "Right now, Mr. Moretti, we need time." Time. That was the one thing Vincent could not buy. He could buy silence. He could buy loyalty. He could buy buildings, favors, tables in crowded restaurants, and men who answered before he finished speaking. But he could not buy 1 clean minute inside his son's body. So he waited. And while he waited, he watched Grace Carter give what he could not. When the donation was finished, Grace sat up slowly. Nurse Helen placed a cup of orange juice in her hand and told her not to stand too quickly. Malik hurried to her side. "Mama, are you dizzy?" "A little," Grace admitted. "But I'm all right." "You should have eaten more before work." Grace almost laughed. "Listen to you." "I'm serious." "I know you are." She touched his cheek, and for a moment the hospital room became softer around them. Then Dr. Ellis entered again. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the first sign of relief. "The match helped," he said. "Luca's numbers are improving. He is not out of danger yet, but this gave us the bridge we needed until the additional units arrive." Grace closed her eyes. Mrs. Bell whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Malik leaned his forehead against Grace's shoulder. Down the hall, Vincent heard the news from another doctor. At first, he did not move. Then his hand covered his mouth, and his whole body bent slightly forward, as if something inside him had finally broken. The man with the gold watch placed a hand on Vincent's shoulder. Vincent pushed it away. "Don't," he said. His voice was low, but sharp enough to stop everyone. He turned toward his men. "All of you, sit down." They obeyed. He looked at the gold watchman. "You thought she was nothing." The younger man swallowed. "Boss, you were just what?" The hallway went still. Vincent stepped closer. He did not shout. Somehow that made it worse. "You threw coins on the floor and laughed while the mother of the person who may have saved my son's life bent down to pick them up." The man's face drained of color. "I didn't know," he whispered. Vincent's eyes hardened, then filled with something heavier than anger. "No," he said. "That is the problem. You did not think you needed to know." Grace heard part of it from inside the room. She did not feel victory. She felt tired. Malik looked toward the hall. "Is that the boy's dad?" Grace followed his eyes. "Yes." "He looks scared." "He is." Malik was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe scared people learn faster." Grace looked at her son, surprised by the old wisdom in his young voice. A few minutes later, Vincent Moretti came to the doorway. He did not enter, so he stood there like a man approaching a church after years away from prayer. Grace looked up at him. For the first time that night, Vincent lowered his eyes. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice rough. "May I speak to you?" Grace held the cup of orange juice between both hands. Malik moved a little closer to her. Vincent saw it and stopped immediately. "I won't come in unless you say I may." Those words changed the room. Not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to show that Vincent Moretti, perhaps for the first time in a long time, understood that not every door opened simply because he stood before it. Grace studied him carefully. Then she said, "You can speak from there." Vincent nodded. His eyes moved to Malik, then back to Grace. "I have spent my life being feared," he said quietly. "Tonight, I learned that fear is useless when your child is the one lying behind a hospital door." Grace said nothing. Vincent's voice shook. "And I learned something worse. The woman my men humiliated tonight is the woman who gave my son a chance to live." He swallowed hard. "I am sorry, Mrs. Carter." The hallway remained silent. Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered with the truth. "Sorry is where a man starts, Mr. Moretti. It is not where he stops." Vincent Moretti stood in the hospital doorway as if Grace Carter had placed a weight in his hands and asked him not to drop it. Sorry is where a man starts. It is not where he stops. Those words did not sound angry. That was what made them stay. Grace had not raised her voice. She had not tried to shame him in front of the doctors, nurses, or the men sitting stiffly along the hallway. She had simply told the truth. And truth, Vincent was beginning to learn, did not need to shout. He looked at her sitting there in her faded blue waitress dress, a small bandage on her arm, wet shoes beneath the chair, her son standing close enough to guard her with his thin little body. The same woman he had watched kneel on the floor of the diner while his men laughed. He had seen it. That was the part he could not escape. He could tell himself he had not thrown the coins. He could tell himself he had not spoken the ugly words. He could tell himself he had been distracted, tired, worried about business, hardened by years of surviving in a city that respected strength more than kindness. But he had seen it, and he had allowed it. Vincent lowered his head. "You're right," he said. Grace did not answer. Malik watched him carefully, not with hatred, but with the cautious eyes of a child who had already learned that adults could disappoint you and still ask to be trusted. Vincent looked at the boy. "What's your name, son?" Malik glanced at his mother first. Grace gave a small nod. "Malik Carter." Vincent breathed in slowly. "Malik Carter," he repeated, as if the name deserved to be remembered properly. "My boy's name is Luca." "I know," Malik said. "The nurse told us." Vincent's jaw tightened at the sound of his son's name from the mouth of the child who had helped save him. "He's 11, Vincent said. "He likes baseball. He pretends he doesn't like old movies, but he watches them with me when he thinks I don't notice." For the first time, Malik's face softened. I like old movies too." Vincent almost smiled, but grief held it back. Then footsteps came down the hall. Dr. Ellis approached with a chart in his hand. Vincent turned so quickly the men behind him stood as well. Dr. Ellis lifted a calming hand. "Luca is responding," he said. "The additional blood supply has arrived. We are moving him to intensive care for close monitoring, but his pressure is stronger now. The next several hours still matter, but this is good news." Vincent's eyes closed. His shoulders shook once. No one spoke. Then he opened his eyes and looked past the doctor toward Grace and Malik. "Thank you," he said. Dr. Ellis nodded. "Thank Mrs. Carter, and thank her son's registry record. Without that lead, we would have lost precious time." Vincent turned slowly toward the row of men in the hallway. The man with the gold watch stared at the floor. "Stand up," Vincent said. The man obeyed. Grace stiffened, but Vincent did not raise his voice. "Take off the watch." The younger man looked startled. "Boss? Take it off." With shaking fingers, the man unclasped the gold watch and held it in his palm. Vincent pointed toward Grace, but his eyes stayed on the man. "That watch costs more than she made in 2 months serving food to men like you. And tonight, you believed it made you worth more than her." The man swallowed. "It doesn't," Vincent said. The hallway was so quiet, Grace could hear the soft beeping from behind Luca's door. Vincent continued. "You will go back to Rosewood Diner before sunrise. You will clean that booth. You will apologize to Mr. Doyle, to every worker there, and then you will never enter that place again unless Mrs. Carter says you may." The man looked up, stunned. "And the coins?" Vincent asked. The man's face turned pale. "I'll pick them up." "No," Vincent said. "You will remember them." Grace set her orange juice on the small table beside her. "Mr. Moretti," she said. Vincent turned immediately. "I don't want a scene made in my workplace. I don't want men walking in there acting sorry because they're afraid of you. That only teaches them to fear a different person." Vincent absorbed the words. "What do you want?" he asked. Grace looked down at Malik's hand resting over hers. "I want my son to see that a man can be wrong and still choose to become better without making himself the center of the story." Vincent looked at Malik. The boy's eyes stayed steady. After a long moment, Vincent nodded. "Then that's what I will try to do." Grace studied him, still guarded. "Try quietly," she said. For the first time that night, Vincent Moretti accepted an order without pride. "Yes, ma'am," he said. By 2 in the morning, St. Catherine's Hospital had settled into that strange quiet, known only to people who have waited through the worst part of a night. The halls were not silent. Machines still breathed. Nurses still moved with soft shoes and tired eyes. Somewhere, a child coughed. Somewhere else, a family whispered prayers over paper cups of cold coffee. But the panic had changed shape. It had become waiting. Grace Carter sat beside Malik in the family lounge, her coat folded over her lap. Nurse Helen had brought them crackers and another cup of juice. Mrs. Bell had fallen asleep in a chair with her purse still held against her stomach. Malik leaned against Grace's side, fighting sleep. "You can close your eyes," Grace whispered. "I'm not tired." "That is what tired boys say." He smiled faintly. "Is the other boy going to be okay?" Grace looked toward the double doors leading to intensive care. "I hope so." Malik was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you think his dad is still scared?" Grace followed his gaze. Vincent Moretti stood at the far end of the hall, alone now. His men had been sent away. His coat was draped over one arm. He was staring at the floor as if some answer might be written there. "Yes," Grace said softly. "I think he is." Malik rested his head on her shoulder. "Good," he murmured. Grace turned slightly. Good?" "Not because his son is sick," Malik said quickly. "I mean, maybe when grown-ups get scared enough, they remember other people can be scared too." Grace kissed the top of his head. Sometimes she wondered how a child who had suffered so much could still speak as if the world deserved another chance. A little after 3, Dr. Ellis came out and told Vincent that Luca remained stable. The next day would matter, but the immediate danger had eased. Vincent did not celebrate. He only sat down in the nearest chair and covered his face with both hands. Grace saw his shoulders move once, then again. She looked away to give him privacy. At dawn, Grace signed the final hospital papers and prepared to take Malik home. Mrs. Bell insisted on driving them, though her old sedan complained all the way from the parking garage. As they passed the hospital entrance, Vincent stepped forward. Grace paused. He kept a respectful distance. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "Dr. Ellis said Luca is stable because of what you did." Grace adjusted Malik's hood. "The doctors did their work, and you did yours." She looked at him carefully. "I did what I hoped someone would do for my child." Those words struck him harder than accusation. Vincent nodded. "I am going to Rosewood," he said. Grace's expression tightened. "I told you I don't want a scene." "There won't be one." "Your men?" "They will not be with me." Grace waited. Vincent continued. "I need to speak with Mr. Doyle. I need to pay for the damage at the booth. And I need to make sure the man who insulted you understands he is not welcome there anymore." Grace's eyes narrowed slightly. That sounds like your kind of justice." Vincent accepted the rebuke. "Then I will do less of my kind," he said, "and more of what you asked." Malik looked up at him. "What does that mean?" Vincent looked at the boy as if he owed him the cleanest answer he could give. "It means I will not make people perform apology for me. I will change what I allow around me." Malik thought about that, then nodded once. "That's better." For the first time since the call, Vincent almost smiled. "Yes," he said. "I believe it is." The Rosewood Diner looked smaller in the pale morning light. The neon sign was off. Rainwater still gathered near the curb. Inside, Mr. Doyle was counting receipts behind the counter when the bell above the door rang. He looked up and froze. Vincent Moretti entered alone. No men. No dark procession. No show of power. Just one tired father in a wrinkled shirt. Mr. Doyle swallowed. "We're closed until 6. "I know," Vincent said. "I won't stay long." He looked toward booth 7. The table had been wiped clean, but a faint coffee stain remained between the tiles below it. Vincent walked over slowly and stood there. For a long moment, he saw Grace kneeling again. Saw the coins, heard the laughter, felt the terrible ease with which he had let it happen. Then he turned back to Mr. Doyle. "Mrs. Carter works here because she needs the job," Vincent said. "Last night, that need was used against her." Mr. Doyle lowered his eyes. Vincent placed a folded envelope on the counter. "This is not for her. If you try to hand it to her like charity, she will refuse it, and she should." Mr. Doyle looked confused. "It is for paid security after midnight," Vincent said. "A working camera by the back door, better locks, and a rule that no customer, no matter how much money he spends, gets to treat your staff like furniture." Mr. Doyle touched the envelope, but did not open it. "And if I say no?" Vincent looked at him, not with threat, but with exhausted honesty. "Then I will still have to live with what I allowed, but you will have to live with what you allow next." Mr. Doyle said nothing. Outside, the first bus of the morning groaned past the diner window. Vincent walked to booth 7, bent down, and picked up one small coin that had rolled beneath the seat and been missed in the cleanup. A dime. He held it in his palm. For the first time in years, Vincent Moretti understood that some debts were too large to be paid with money. The Grace Carter returned to the Rosewood Diner 2 nights later. Mr. Doyle had told her to take more time, but Grace knew bills did not wait just because a heart had been through too much. Malik was sleeping better now, though he still asked about Luca Moretti every morning before school. "Do you think he woke up yet?" Malik had asked over oatmeal. "I think he's trying," Grace said. "Can we pray for him?" Grace had looked at her son across the small kitchen table. This boy who had every reason to be bitter and still chose kindness before breakfast. "Yes," she whispered. "We can." Now, standing behind the counter at Rosewood, Grace tied her apron with slower hands than usual. The diner looked the same at first glance. Same red stools, same cracked sugar jars, same smell of coffee, toast, and old frying oil. But it was not the same. There was a new camera above the back door, a new lock near the kitchen entrance, and a small sign by the register that read, "Customers will be treated with respect. Staff will be treated the same." Grace had stared at that sign for a long time when she first walked in. Mr. Doyle came from the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should have put that up years ago," he said. Grace looked at him. He could not quite meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Grace," he continued. "For last night. For other nights, too. I thought keeping trouble out meant keeping quiet. Turns out quiet can invite trouble in." Grace folded a clean towel and placed it beside the coffee machine. "I needed this job," she said. "I know. And you knew I needed it." Mr. Doyle's face tightened with shame. "Yes." Grace nodded slowly. "Well, then don't apologize like it only happened once." That landed where it needed to. Mr. Doyle breathed out. "I won't." The bell above the door rang. Grace looked up. A man stepped inside. Alone. No gold watch this time. His expensive coat was gone, replaced by a plain dark jacket. He stood near the entrance with both hands visible at his sides, as if he understood that even a doorway could be too much if entered the wrong way. It was the man from booth 7, the one who had thrown the coins. Grace's body went still. Mr. Doyle started forward, but Grace lifted one hand. The man swallowed. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice low. "My name is Anthony Bellini." Grace said nothing. He looked toward the floor near booth 7, then back at her. "I came to apologize, not because Mr. Moretti told me to, but he told me not to come unless I understood what I was apologizing for." Grace watched him carefully. Anthony's face reddened. "I thought being close to powerful men made me powerful," he said. "I thought money gave me permission to be small and still feel tall." The diner was quiet. 2 regulars at the counter listened without turning around. Anthony reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a small paper envelope. Grace's eyes sharpened. "If that's money," she said, "put it away." He froze. Then he nodded and slid it back into his pocket. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was the first thing I thought of. That's part of the problem." Grace did not soften, but she did not look away either. Anthony looked at the table where he had sat that night. "I threw coins into coffee and made you pick them up," he said. I did it because I wanted people to laugh. I did it because I did not see you as someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone who had already worked harder that day than I have worked in years." His voice cracked. "I am ashamed." Grace held the towel in both hands. A younger version of herself might have wanted the whole room to see him humiliated. But age, motherhood, and sorrow had taught her that humiliation did not heal humiliation. It only passed the wound to another hand. "You should be ashamed," Grace said. "But don't stand in my workplace bleeding regret all over the floor and expect me to clean that up too." Anthony lowered his head. "Yes, ma'am." "If you mean what you said, then leave this place better than you entered it." He nodded. "How?" Grace looked toward the counter, and then toward the old couple who came every Thursday because the husband could no longer cook breakfast for his wife. "You start by never mistaking service for weakness again." Anthony looked at the customers. Then he looked back at Grace. "I won't." The bell rang again as he left. Mr. Doyle exhaled. Grace turned back to the coffee machine, though her hands trembled slightly. At 9:15, the phone behind the counter rang. Mr. Doyle answered, listened, then smiled for the first time in days. "Grace," he said, holding out the receiver. "It's St. Catherine's." Grace took the phone. Nurse Helen's voice came through warm and tired. "Mrs. Carter, I thought Malik would want to know. Luca opened his eyes this evening." Grace closed her eyes. Behind her, the diner lights hummed softly. "And his father?" she asked. Nurse Helen paused. He cried." Grace looked out through the window at the dark Detroit street, where rain had begun to fall again, gentler this time. "Good," she whispered. "Maybe that boy will wake up to a different father." Luca Moretti opened his eyes on a Thursday evening, while the rain moved softly down the hospital windows. He did not speak at first. He only blinked at the ceiling, pale and frightened, with a small tube near his nose, and his father sitting beside the bed like a man afraid to breathe too loudly. Vincent Moretti had not left the hospital in 2 days. His dark coat hung over the back of a chair. His shirt was wrinkled. The silver hair he usually kept so carefully combed had fallen loose across his forehead. Anyone who had known him in the old life would not have recognized him, not because he looked weaker, but because he looked human. When Luca turned his head, Vincent leaned forward. "Hey, champ," he whispered. Luca's lips moved. "Dad?" Vincent took his son's hand in both of his. "I'm here." Luca looked around slowly. "What happened?" Vincent swallowed. There were many answers he could have given. Medical answers, simple answers, half answers that would protect his pride. But the truth had been following him since the night at the Rosewood Diner, and he was tired of running ahead of it. "You got very sick," he said. "The doctors helped you, and so did a woman named Grace Carter." Luca blinked. "And her son," Vincent added. "A boy named Malik." The name seemed to settle in the room like a small light. "Can I thank them?" Luca whispered. Vincent's eyes filled. "Yes," he said, "if they allow us to." 3 days later, Grace stood outside Luca's hospital room with Malik beside her. She had almost said no, not because she wished the boy harm. Never that. But because she did not want her son turned into a symbol for another man's redemption. Malik was not a lesson. He was her child. A good child, yes, but still a child who needed breakfast, homework, clean socks, and sleep. Vincent seemed to understand that before she said it. When he met them in the hallway, he did not bring cameras. He did not bring flowers larger than the doorway. He did not bring men in dark coats or envelopes meant to solve a life he had not lived. He came alone. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "Malik." Grace nodded. Malik stood close to her, holding a small paperback book he had brought for Luca. It was one of his old baseball stories, the corners worn soft from reading. Vincent looked at the book. "That's kind of you." Malik shrugged. "Hospitals get boring." A faint smile touched Vincent's face. "They do." Inside the room, Luca sat propped against pillows, still weak but awake. His eyes moved first to Grace, then to Malik. "You're Malik?" he asked. "Yes. My dad said you helped find the right blood." Malik looked uncomfortable with praise. "My records helped. My mom helped more." Luca turned to Grace. "Thank you, ma'am." Grace stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You just get well." Luca nodded. Then he looked back at Malik. "Do you really like old baseball movies?" Malik smiled for the first time that morning. Only the good ones. Can you tell me which ones are good? That was how the room changed. Not all at once, not like a miracle in a movie. Just slowly. And as two boys began talking about baseball, hospital food, and the unfairness of being told to rest when you were already tired of lying down. Grace watched them from the foot of the bed. Vincent stood beside her, quiet. After a while, he said, "I spoke with Mr. Doyle." Grace did not take her eyes off Malik. "I know. The diner has new rules now. I saw. And the workers will be paid more for late shifts." Grace turned then. Vincent kept his voice low. "Not as a favor to you. As a correction to what should have been right before I ever walked through that door." Grace studied him for a long moment. "That matters," she said. "But it still doesn't make you the hero of this story." Vincent nodded. "I know." And this time, Grace believed he might. Weeks passed. Luca grew stronger. Malik visited twice, then wrote him notes when homework and bus schedules got in the way. The two boys became friends in the quiet, ordinary way children do when adults stop making everything complicated. At the Rosewood Diner, the night shift changed. Customers still came in, tired, hungry, and sometimes rude, but the old fear had lifted. Mr. Doyle learned to step forward sooner. Grace learned that keeping a job did not mean swallowing every insult served with it. One Saturday morning, Vincent came into the diner alone. He sat at the counter, not booth 7. Grace poured him coffee. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Vincent placed something on the counter. A dime. Grace looked at it. "I found it under the booth," he said, "from that night." Grace did not touch it. Vincent's voice lowered. "I keep it with me, not to remember what I lost, but to remember what I almost never saw." Grace looked at the tired man before her. Then she looked through the window, where Malik and Luca stood outside laughing over a baseball glove Luca had brought. The morning sun touched the glass. For a long moment, Grace said nothing. Then she picked up the dime. It was small in her palm, worn at the edges, ordinary. The kind of coin people dropped without thinking, stepped over without noticing, tossed away because it seemed too little to matter. Grace turned it once between her fingers. Then she placed it back on the counter, not sliding it toward Vincent, not keeping it for herself, but setting it directly between them. "Mr. Moretti," she said quietly, "that dime belongs to the night you finally saw me, but it does not belong to the rest of my life." Vincent lifted his eyes, but Grace's voice remained soft, but something in it had become unshakable. "I am grateful your son lived. I am glad Malik could help. I am glad this diner is safer now. But I do not want my boy growing up thinking his mother's worth began the night a powerful man noticed her." Vincent did not speak. Grace looked toward Malik outside, his laughter bright against the glass. "I was his mother before that night. I was tired before that night. I was honest before that night. I was standing, even when your men thought I was kneeling." The words settled between them like a prayer spoken without music. Vincent lowered his head. "You're right," he said. Grace nodded. Then she reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small ceramic jar. It was old and chipped near the rim. On the front, written in black marker, were the words, "Staff Emergency Fund." She dropped the dime inside. It made a tiny sound against the other coins. Not dramatic, not grand, just real. "That's where it belongs now," Grace said. "Not in your pocket, not in my pain, somewhere useful." Vincent looked at the jar. For the first time, he seemed to understand that forgiveness was not the same as being released from memory. Some memories had to be made useful, or they would remain wounds forever. Grace picked up the coffee pot again. Vincent stood slowly. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. Grace gave him a small smile. "You paid for it?" He looked down at the counter and almost laughed through the ache in his chest. "I did." "Then you're welcome." It was the first ordinary thing she had ever said to him, and somehow it was the most merciful. Vincent left the diner without ceremony. Outside, Luca waved through the window. Malik waved back, then ran inside with his cheeks bright from the cold. "Mama," he said, breathless. "Luca says when he's stronger, his dad might take us to a Tigers game." Grace wiped a ring of coffee from the counter. "That sounds nice. You think we can go?" Grace looked at her son, then at the diner around her, at the new sign, the working camera, the safer door, the jar on the counter holding one small dime from a terrible night. Then she looked down at her own hands, hands that had picked up coins, hands that had signed hospital forms, hands that had held Malik through fever, fear, and every hard season that tried to take softness from them. "Yes," she said. "Maybe we can." Malik smiled. Grace smiled back. And in that moment, the Rosewood Diner did not feel like a place where tired people merely survived the night. It felt like a place where morning had finally learned how to enter. Grace Carter was still a waitress, still a mother, still counting bills, still rising before the sun and walking home under streetlights when the world was half asleep. But something had changed. Not because Vincent Moretti had changed, not because Anthony Bellini had apologized, not because a new sign hung beside the register, or because the late shift finally had better locks. Something had changed because Grace had stopped mistaking endurance for silence. She had learned that dignity was not given by the rich, restored by the guilty, or proven by suffering. Dignity was what remained when everything else was stripped away. It was the quiet voice inside a person saying, "Even here, even now, I am still human." That evening, as the sun lowered over East Detroit, Grace untied her apron and folded it neatly beneath the counter. Mr. Doyle looked up from the register. "Heading out?" "Yes," Grace said. "Malik has homework." Mr. Doyle nodded. "Grace?" She paused. He looked toward the staff emergency fund jar. "That was a good idea." Grace smiled faintly. "Then keep filling it." "I will." She put on her coat and stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The sidewalk still shone beneath the streetlights, but the sky had opened just enough for one thin gold line of evening to stretch between the buildings. Malik waited near the corner, waving both hands as if she could ever miss him. Grace walked toward her son. Her feet still hurt. Her back still ached. Tomorrow would still come with bills, a breakfast bus fare and another long shift. But she walked differently now. Not louder. Not harder. Just straighter. Behind her, the Rosewood Diner glowed in the window glass. In the small jar by the register, a dime rested among other coins, no longer a symbol of humiliation, but the first seed of protection for someone else who might one day need help at midnight. And somewhere across the city, Vincent Moretti sat beside his recovering son, learning slowly that power without compassion was only another kind of poverty. Grace did not need to see that lesson finished. She had her own life to live, her own child to raise, her own morning to claim. She reached Malik, and he slipped his hand into hers. "Mama," he said, "are you okay?" Grace looked down at him, yet at the thoughtful brown eyes that had seen too much and still searched for goodness. Then she smiled. "I am," she said. Not because everything is easy. Malik squeezed her hand. Then why? Grace looked ahead, where the wet street shone like a road washed clean. Because I know who I am. Together, mother and son walked home beneath the first clear sky in days. And for the first time in a long time, Grace Carter did not feel invisible. She did not feel small. She did not feel like a woman waiting for the world to decide her worth. She was Grace Carter. A mother, a worker, a woman who had knelt once to pick up coins, then rose with more dignity than every powerful man in the room. And no one, not Vincent Moretti, not the men at Booth 7, not hunger, not fear, not all the hard years behind her, could ever make her forget that again.